Ambassador Sarah Chun stood at the viewing deck of the Galactic Council station, watching the stars shimmer through the transparent aluminum walls. She had spent 3 years building diplomatic bridges between humanity and the 17 alien species that controlled this sector of the galaxy. 3 years of careful negotiations, cultural exchanges, and slowly earning respect for her young species. The communication device on her wrist buzzed with an urgent priority signal. Sarah's heart sank as she recognized the encryption code. It was from Earth's emergency command center. She moved quickly to her private quarters, sealing the door behind her before activating the holographic display. The face of Admiral Martinez appeared, his weathered features grim with barely contained rage. Behind him, Sarah could see the chaos of the command center, officers rushing between stations with expressions of shock and horror. "Sarah, we need you back on Earth immediately," Martinez said, his voice tight with emotion. "There's been an incident on Kepler 442b. Sarah's blood ran cold. Kepler 442b was humanity's first colony world, established just 2 years ago. It was home to 5,000 colonists, including many families with children who had volunteered to build humanity's future among the stars." "What kind of incident?" she asked, though the look in Martinez's eyes already told her everything she needed to know. "The hegemony fleet arrived at Kepler 442b yesterday," Martinez continued. "They claimed the world violated some ancient territorial claim we'd never heard of. The colonists tried to negotiate, sent messages explaining they were peaceful farmers and scientists. The hegemony response was..." He paused, struggling with the words. "They bombarded the schools first. Sarah deliberately targeted the educational centers where the children were learning." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She gripped the edge of her desk as the Admiral continued his report. The hegemony, one of the most powerful alien empires in the galaxy, had executed what could only be called a systematic massacre. They had destroyed the colony's defenses, then methodically targeted civilian areas. The final death toll was over 4,000 humans, including nearly 800 children. "They sent us a message afterward," Martinez said, his voice now carrying a dangerous edge. "They said this was a warning to humanity about expanding beyond our designated zone. They called our children breeding stock of a pest species and said they were doing the galaxy a favor." Sarah felt something cold and hard crystallize in her chest. She had spent years learning about alien cultures, understanding their perspectives, finding common ground. She had believed that reason and diplomacy could solve any conflict. But this was not a misunderstanding or cultural difference. This was deliberate cruelty. "The Security Council has called an emergency session," Martinez continued. "Every human government is represented. They want you to return to Earth and address the Council before we make any formal response to the hegemony." Sarah nodded slowly, her mind already racing. "I'll leave immediately. What's our current military status?" "That's classified for now," but Martinez glanced around, then leaned closer to the camera. "Let's just say the Defense Department has been busy these past few years. Very busy." The transmission ended, leaving Sarah alone with the weight of what she had learned. She moved to her window and looked out at the peaceful station around her. Alien diplomats from dozens of species went about their daily business, negotiating trade agreements and territorial disputes with civilized discourse. None of them knew that everything was about to change. Sarah began packing her belongings, her movements mechanical as her mind processed the implications. The hegemony had just made the gravest mistake in galactic history. They had killed human children, not in the heat of battle or as collateral damage, but deliberately as a message of contempt. They had no idea what humanity was capable of when truly provoked. As her ship departed the station 3 hours later, Sarah composed her resignation from her position as humanity's ambassador to the Galactic Council. But even as she wrote the formal diplomatic language, her thoughts were much simpler and far more dangerous. The aliens were about to learn why human beings had conquered their own world so thoroughly. They were about to discover what happened when a species that had spent millennia perfecting the art of war decided that diplomacy was no longer an option. The hegemony had wanted to send humanity a message about their place in the galaxy. Sarah would make sure they received humanity's reply in return. The United Nations Emergency Assembly had never seen anything like it. Representatives from every nation on Earth filled the Great Hall, their faces bearing the same expression of cold fury that Sarah had seen in Admiral Martinez's eyes. The usual political divisions that plague human governments had evaporated overnight, replaced by something far more primitive and powerful. President Harrison of the North American Federation stood at the podium, his voice carrying clearly across the silent assembly. We have confirmed the reports from Kepler 442b. The hegemony attack was not a military action. It was systematic extermination. They targeted our children because they wanted to make us suffer. Sarah sat in the diplomatic section, still wearing her ambassador's formal robes, though she knew she would never wear them again. Around her, she could see the faces of people who had spent their careers believing in peaceful coexistence between species. That faith had died along with the colonists on Kepler 442b. Ambassador Chun has provided us with detailed intelligence on hegemony military capabilities, as well as their political structure, Harrison continued. We now know that this attack was authorized at the highest levels of their empire. It was not the action of rogue commanders, it was official policy. The president paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the assembly. The question before us today is simple. How does humanity respond to genocide? Sarah watched as, one by one, the national representatives stood to speak. The Brazilian delegate spoke of the children who would never grow up to see Earth's blue skies again. The Chinese representative described the promising young scientists who had died in the colony's research centers. The African Union spokesman talked about families that had been wiped from existence in a matter of hours. But it was the representative from Iceland, a small nation with a long history of peaceful neutrality, who spoke the words that would echo through history. My country has not participated in warfare for over a century, he said, his voice steady and calm. We have always believed that conflicts can be resolved through dialogue and understanding. But there can be no dialogue with those who murder children to make a point. There can be no understanding with those who view our species as vermin to be exterminated. He looked directly at Sarah as he continued. I call for the immediate termination of all diplomatic relations with any species or government that supports or allies with the hegemony. I call for the mobilization of every military resource at humanity's disposal. And I call for a formal declaration that humanity will not rest until the hegemony regime is removed from power permanently. The vote was unanimous. 4 billion humans represented by their governments had just declared total war on an alien empire that controlled 300 star systems. As the assembly voted to activate humanity's classified military projects, Sarah thought about the shocked expressions she would see on alien faces across the galaxy when they learned the news. For 3 years, humanity had presented itself as a peaceful, cooperative species eager to join the galactic community. They had carefully hidden their true capabilities behind a facade of diplomatic niceness. The aliens had no idea that while humanity's ambassadors were learning alien customs and languages, their military engineers had been reverse engineering every piece of alien technology they could get their hands on. They didn't know that human factories hidden on the dark side of the moon had been producing weapons that combined human ingenuity with alien physics in ways that no other species had ever imagined. Most importantly, they had no understanding of human military doctrine. Other species fought wars to gain territory or resources or political advantage. Humans had spent their entire evolutionary history learning how to fight wars for survival, for vengeance, and for the complete destruction of their enemies. Admiral Martinez took the stage as the assembly concluded its formal votes. His dress uniform was immaculate, but Sarah could see the predatory gleam in his eyes that she remembered from his message. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Operation Righteous Fury, he announced as holographic displays filled the air above the assembly. For the past 5 years, the Defense Department has been preparing for the possibility that humanity might face an existential threat from hostile alien forces. We are ready. The displays showed ship designs that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. Humanity's public fleet consisted of exploration vessels and small defense craft that looked primitive compared to alien technology. But these new ships were different, sleek, angular predators that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The hegemony believes they are dealing with a primitive species that has barely learned to travel between stars, Martinez continued. They're about to discover that appearances can be very deceiving. Our fleets are already moving toward hegemony space. We estimate first contact with their outer defense networks will occur in 72 hours. Sarah closed her eyes and thought about the 800 children who had died on Kepler 442b. She thought about the hegemony officials who had laughed as they ordered the bombardment of schools and playgrounds. She thought about the message they had sent, calling human children breeding stock of a pest species. They were about to learn what happened when they threatened the children of a species that had evolved from predators. The hegemony fortress world of Kethmoran had stood unconquered for 8,000 years. Its orbital defense platforms could destroy entire fleets, and its surface was protected by energy shields that had never been breached. The planet served as the gateway to the hegemony's core systems, a symbol of their military might that struck fear into the hearts of their enemies. Hegemony Admiral Zexthal stood in the command center of the primary defense platform, reviewing routine patrol reports with the casual confidence of someone who had never faced a real threat. The humans were somewhere out there in the void, probably gathering their pathetic little fleet for some desperate suicide attack. It would be amusing to watch them die. Admiral, we're detecting anomalous readings at the edge of the system, reported his sensor operator, a nervous young officer whose scales had barely finished developing. The signatures don't match any known ship configurations. Zexthal's mandibles clicked in irritation. Pirates, most likely. Send a patrol squadron to investigate and destroy them. Sir, the readings suggest approximately 200 vessels of unknown class. That seems large for a pirate fleet. The Admiral's head snapped toward the sensor station. 200 ships was larger than most military fleets in this sector. Display the sensor data. The holographic tactical display showed the outer edge of the Kethmoran system, where space should have been empty except for the occasional asteroid. Instead, thermal signatures indicated a massive fleet emerging from what appeared to be nowhere. How did they approach without our long-range sensors detecting them? Zexthal demanded. Unknown, sir. They seem to have some form of stealth technology we've never encountered before. As they watched, the mysterious fleet continued to emerge from empty space. The ships were unlike anything in the hegemony databases. Angular, aggressive designs that seemed to drink in the light from the system's star rather than reflecting it. Sir, we're receiving a transmission, the communications officer announced. It's being broadcast on all frequencies, with translation protocols active. Display it. The main screen flickered to life, showing the face of a human female in what appeared to be a military uniform. Her expression was calm, almost serene, but her eyes held something that made Zexthal's blood run cold. This is Fleet Admiral Chun of the Human Defense Force, the woman said, her voice carrying clearly across the command center. I am addressing the military commanders of the Hegemony Fortress at Kethmoran. You have 72 hours to surrender unconditionally and prepare to face trial for crimes against humanity. This is your only warning. Zexthal's mandibles spread in what his species used as laughter. Humans. The pest species thinks they can threaten us. He activated his own transmission system. Unknown ships, you are trespassing in hegemony space. Retreat immediately or be destroyed. The human admiral's expression didn't change. Admiral, my name is Sarah Chun. Until recently, I served as humanity's ambassador to the Galactic Council. I spent 3 years learning about your culture, your history, your military capabilities. I know exactly what your forces are capable of. She leaned forward slightly, and Zexthal found himself unconsciously stepping back from the screen. What you don't know, she continued, is what my species is capable of when you murder our children. You're about to receive a very thorough education. The transmission ended, leaving the command center in stunned silence. Zexthal quickly recovered his composure and began issuing orders. All defense platforms to full alert. Launch all fighter squadrons. Prepare the orbital bombardment systems. For the next several hours, the two fleets faced each other across the void while Zexthal tried to understand what he was seeing. His sensors indicated that the human ships were heavily armed, but their technology seemed impossible. They appeared to be using some form of gravitational manipulation for propulsion, and Their weapons' signatures suggested energy outputs that should have required power plants larger than their entire hulls. "Admiral, the humans are moving," his tactical officer reported. "They're advancing in formation toward the outer defense perimeter. Activate the orbital defense grid. Show these primitives the power of the hegemony." The ancient defense platforms that had protected Kethmoran for millennia turned toward the approaching human fleet. Each platform mounted weapons capable of cracking planets, and there were over 50 of them arranged in a perfect defensive formation. The platforms fired simultaneously, filling space with enough destructive energy to vaporize a small moon. The brilliant streams of plasma and particle beams converged on the leading human ships, and for a moment Zexthal allowed himself to smile. Then his smile faded. The human ships were still there, completely unharmed. Somehow, they had deflected or absorbed the entire bombardment without taking any visible damage. "How is that possible?" he whispered. His question was answered when a human fleet returned fire. The weapons that struck the hegemony platforms didn't look like anything Zexthal had ever seen. Beams of pure darkness that seemed to tear holes in reality itself. Where they struck, the massive defense platforms simply ceased to exist, not destroyed, but somehow unraveled at the molecular level. In less than 10 minutes, 8,000 years of hegemony military engineering was reduced to expanding clouds of debris. "All ships, retreat to the inner system," Zexthal ordered, his voice no longer steady. "Request immediate reinforcement from the home fleet." As his remaining forces fled toward the planet, Zexthal realized that everything the hegemony thought they knew about humans had been carefully crafted deception. The peaceful, primitive species that had begged for acceptance into the galactic community was a mask hiding something far more dangerous. The humans weren't trying to join galactic civilization. They were preparing to replace it. The hegemony high command chamber on the capital world of Veltar had never experienced panic before. For over 10,000 years, the ruling council had governed 300 star systems with absolute authority, their military might unquestioned throughout the galaxy. Now, as reports flooded in from across their empire, that confidence was crumbling like sand. Supreme Commander Velnash stood before the holographic display that showed their territory, watching in horror as red indicators marked the positions of human fleets. In just 6 days, humanity had somehow materialized massive battle groups in dozens of hegemony systems simultaneously. "How many fortress worlds have fallen?" he asked his intelligence chief, though he already dreaded the answer. 17, Supreme Commander. "The humans appear to be using some form of instantaneous travel technology. Our fleets arrive at threatened systems only to find the battles already over." Velnash's 4 arms gestured helplessly at the tactical display. "This is impossible. 6 days ago, human space consisted of one primitive world and a handful of mining outposts. They had no military fleets, no advanced technology, no strategic capabilities." "Sir, we've been analyzing the wreckage from Kethmoran," another aide reported. "The human weapons appear to use principles we don't understand. They're manipulating fundamental forces in ways our physics say should be impossible." The Supreme Commander studied the scattered reports from his surviving fleet commanders. The humans fought unlike any species the hegemony had ever encountered. They didn't target military installations first. They systematically destroyed anything connected to the government or military command structure, then left the civilian populations completely unharmed. It was as if they were surgically removing the hegemony's ability to govern while leaving everything else intact. "Sir, we have an incoming transmission from the human fleet at Zephyr Station," the communications officer announced. "They're requesting to speak with the High Command directly." "Display it." The main screen showed Admiral Chen again, but now she was standing on what appeared to be the bridge of a warship. Behind her, Velnash could see displays showing tactical information from battles across hegemony space. "Supreme Commander Velnash," she began, and the fact that she knew his name sent chills through the chamber. "I trust you've been following our progress through your territory." "You cannot possibly sustain this offensive," Velnash replied, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. "The entire galaxy will unite against your aggression." Admiral Chen's expression remained perfectly calm. "Actually, Supreme Commander, I've been in communication with the other galactic powers. They're quite interested in our conflict. It seems the hegemony has made many enemies over the centuries. She gestured to someone off-screen, and the display split to show representatives from several major alien civilizations. Velnash recognized the Crystalline Confederacy, the Void Dancers, and the Trade Consortium, all species that had clashed with hegemony expansion in the past. The humans have presented us with an interesting proposal, announced the Confederacy speaker, its crystalline form refracting light in complex patterns. They have offered to restrict their military actions to hegemony space in exchange for non-interference in their operations. This is unprecedented, Velnash protested. The Galactic Accords prohibit the Galactic Accords, interrupted the consortium representative, also prohibit the deliberate extermination of civilian populations. Your attack on the human colony violated every principle of civilized warfare. Admiral Chen stepped forward. We've shared the complete records of your assault on Kepler 442b with the galactic community. The targeting of children, the contemptuous messages your forces sent afterward, it's all been documented and verified. For the first time in his long career, Velnash found himself without words. The hegemony's attack had been meant as a simple warning to an inferior species. They had never considered that other civilizations might view their actions as grounds for abandoning their traditional neutrality. What do you want? He finally asked. Complete surrender of all hegemony military forces, Admiral Chun replied without hesitation. Dissolution of your government. Trials for all individuals involved in the massacre of our colonists. And reparations to be paid to the families of the victims. Impossible. The hegemony does not surrender. Admiral Chun nodded, as if she had expected this response. Then, we continue our current operations. In approximately 18 hours, human fleets will reach your core systems. I suggest you use that time to consider whether your pride is worth the complete destruction of your empire. The transmission ended, leaving the High Command chamber in stunned silence. Velnash looked around at his advisors, seeing fear in their faces for the first time in their lives. Options? He asked quietly. We could attempt to negotiate a ceasefire, suggested his diplomatic advisor. Perhaps offer limited concessions - no. The voice came from Elder Zexkull, the oldest member of the High Command and architect of many of the hegemony's most ruthless policies. We do not negotiate with inferior species. Elder, with respect, these humans have destroyed 17 fortress worlds in 6 days. The intelligence chief protested. They clearly possess capabilities we don't understand. Zexkull's ancient form rose from his seat, his multiple eyes glowing with fanatic determination. Then, we make them understand the price of challenging us. Order the activation of the Omega Protocol. The chamber fell silent. The Omega Protocol was the hegemony's ultimate weapon, a network of planet-killing devices hidden throughout their territory. It had never been used, existing only as a final guarantee that the hegemony would never face total defeat. Elder, the Omega Protocol would destroy our own worlds, Velnash said carefully. Billions of our own citizens would die. Better that than surrender to these human parasites, Zexkull declared. If we cannot rule the galaxy, then we will ensure that these humans cannot either. As the activation codes were transmitted to the hidden weapons across hegemony space, none of them noticed the subtle changes in their communication systems. They had no way of knowing that every transmission, every order, every secret command was being intercepted and analyzed by human intelligence systems. Admiral Chun was about to discover just how far the hegemony was willing to go in their desperation. Admiral Sarah Chun stood in the command center of the Human Defense Force flagship, watching as her intelligence officers decoded the intercepted hegemony transmissions. Around her, the bridge crew worked with the quiet efficiency that had become humanity's trademark in this war. No panic, no confusion, just professionals executing their duties with deadly precision. Admiral, we've confirmed the nature of the Omega Protocol, reported Commander Harrison, her chief intelligence officer. They've activated planet-killing weapons in 73 systems across their territory. The devices are designed to destabilize planetary cores, causing the worlds to tear themselves apart. Sarah felt a cold fury settle in her stomach. Even now, facing complete military defeat, the hegemony was preparing to commit genocide on a scale that dwarfed their attack on Kepler 442b. They would rather murder billions of their own citizens than accept surrender. Time until the weapons reach critical activation, she asked. Approximately 4 hours, Admiral. Once they reach that point, the process becomes irreversible. Sarah turned to her tactical officer. Status of our fleet positions? All battle groups are in position, Admiral. Operation Mercy is ready to execute on your command. For a moment, Sarah thought about the path that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she had been a diplomat, dedicated to building bridges between species and finding peaceful solutions to conflicts. The hegemony had destroyed that version of herself when they murdered human children to make a political point. But even in her transformation from diplomat to military commander, Sarah had retained her core belief in the value of innocent life. The hegemony leadership might be monsters, but the civilians on those threatened worlds were simply people trying to live their lives under a brutal government. Execute Operation Mercy, she ordered. All fleets begin simultaneous insertion. Across hegemony space, human ships that had been hiding in the dark between stars suddenly materialized directly above the worlds targeted by the Omega Protocol. They moved with impossible speed, their advanced propulsion systems allowing them to reach planetary surfaces in minutes rather than hours. On the bridge of her flagship, Sarah watched as reports flooded in from her fleet commanders. Human Special Forces teams were deploying across 73 worlds simultaneously, racing against time to locate and disable the planet-killer devices before they could complete their activation sequences. Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the Hegemony High Command, her communications officer announced. Supreme Commander Vel Nash appears extremely agitated. The main screen showed Vel Nash standing in what looked like a heavily fortified bunker, his 4 arms gesticulating wildly as he spoke. Human Commander, your forces are trespassing on sovereign hegemony worlds. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences. Sarah stepped forward, her expression calm despite the urgency of the situation developing around her. Supreme Commander, we're aware of your attempt to activate the Omega Protocol. Our forces are currently in the process of preventing the murder of approximately 15 billion innocent civilians. Those are our worlds. Vel Nash screamed, his composure finally cracking completely. We have the right to do with them as we choose. No, Sarah replied quietly. You don't. As she spoke, updates continued to flow across her tactical displays. Human teams had successfully located and disabled 18 of the planet-killer devices. 22 more had been found and were in the process of being disarmed. The operation was proceeding ahead of schedule, but there were still dozens of weapons that hadn't been found. Admiral, Commander Harrison reported, we're detecting massive energy spikes from the remaining devices. The hegemony has accelerated their activation sequence. Time to critical mass is now 90 minutes. Sarah nodded grimly and opened a channel to all her fleet commanders. All units, this is Admiral Chun. We are switching to emergency protocols. Ignore all other considerations and focus solely on locating the remaining devices. The lives of billions depend on our success in the next 90 minutes. What happened next would be remembered as one of the greatest rescue operations in galactic history. Human forces deployed across dozens of worlds, working with local populations who had initially fled in terror, but quickly realized that the humans were there to save them, not conquer them. On Hegemony Prime itself, Human Special Forces teams fought through the capital city's defenses to reach the primary control facility for the Omega Protocol. In underground bunkers, laboratories, and hidden military installations, human soldiers and engineers worked frantically to understand and disable alien technology that had been designed to be tamper-proof. With just minutes to spare, the last planet-killer device was successfully disarmed on a remote mining world at the edge of hegemony space. 15 billion lives had been saved by human intervention, and the images of human soldiers helping evacuate alien civilians were broadcast across the galaxy. In his bunker on Veltar, Supreme Commander Vel Nash stared at the reports of his ultimate weapon's failure with empty eyes. The humans hadn't just defeated the hegemony military. They had saved the very people the hegemony had been willing to sacrifice. Sir, his aide whispered, the humans are broadcasting a message to all remaining hegemony forces. Admiral Chan appeared on the screen one final time, but now she was standing on the surface of Veltar itself, with the hegemony capital city visible in the background. This is Admiral Chun of the Human Defense Force. The hegemony government has been dissolved. All military personnel are ordered to surrender to human forces for processing. Civilian populations are advised to remain calm and await further instructions. She paused, looking directly into the camera with eyes that had seen too much death and suffering. To the people of these worlds, I want you to know that humanity does not seek to rule over you. We came here seeking justice for our murdered children, and justice has been served. In the coming months, we will work with representatives from across the galaxy to establish new governments for your worlds, governments that will never again threaten innocent life. Velnash closed his eyes and realized that he was witnessing the end of one era and the beginning of another. The hegemony had ruled through fear and brutality for 10,000 years, but their reign was over. In its place, a new power had emerged, one that fought not for conquest, but for the protection of the innocent. The galaxy would never be the same, and perhaps Velnash thought as human soldiers entered his bunker, that was exactly what it needed.